Welcome. My name is Kendra Morgan, and I'm the host of the Rise and Build podcast, where we hope to empower you to rise up and build a strong family, knowing you have to strengthen your hands to do the good work. Come with us as we rise and build. Hi, you guys. It is another exciting day on the Rise and Build podcast. I am sitting across from Kristen Hale. She is a licensed professional counselor, a registered play therapist, and she's also an infant mental health specialist. So we are going to learn a lot. She's got a lot of wisdom, a lot to share. I know. I have a lot of really good questions for her because I want to get as much out of her as possible because we are going to learn a lot today. We are still in the series of play, but with Kristen, we are specifically going to talk about play therapy. We want to know what it is, who needs it, what does it look like? We've got a lot of questions with play therapy. But first, Kristen, tell us about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. The topic of play, as you can imagine, is one of my most favorite things to talk about. Yes. So to get to do that for an afternoon is a real treat.
Yes, I love it.
I actually am a counselor. Over the last couple years, or actually the last 18 years, I've been a counselor. But before that, a lot of even my clients don't know that I was a teacher. And so I taught for several years. And about midway through my career, really felt the Lord calling me to a change. And so I went in and got my degree in counseling and went into the counseling field. And now, ironically, I've done that longer than I taught, which feels really odd.
I did not know you taught.
Yeah.
What grade did you teach?
I taught a little bit of everything.
Okay.
Mostly high school and middle school.
Okay.
But did some homeschool teaching and some different things over the years. And so have really loved blending that piece of loving children.
I love it.
And adding that to the idea of a counseling piece for children and families.
Okay. And then tell us day to day, what do you do? I mean, I know you're a counselor, but tell us, where do you work? Tell us about that.
So over the last 8 years ago, 2016, we just celebrated our 8-year anniversary. I opened Connect and Restore. Prior to that, I'd been in community mental health. I'd worked in nonprofit settings. I'd done a lot in mental health, but 8 years ago, I started my own private practice. And the story is that I really thought that's all it would ever be.
Yeah.
Is me by myself.
And it's not.
And it's not.
No.
And we've been very blessed.
Yeah.
We now have a team of 20 therapists that work for us that do pretty much birth to old age therapy. So our heart is to wrap around families.
I love it.
And so when a family comes into our practice, they may come in, maybe mom sought out counseling, but then in the course of her counseling, we might realize, oh, wow, there's some challenges with kiddo. And so then that family, that child becomes a priority on our counseling list to get in with one of our other therapists. So we really seek to wrap around families because we believe that family units are so important, and getting everybody to a place of healing and hope is what we function to do.
I love it. I love it. And that's one reason Building All Children refers a lot of families to you, because I've learned early on with you that it's not only just about the child, but it is really connecting with the whole family, the whole unit, and giving them that hope. And so I love that about you, Kristen. And I feel like there's so many areas of wisdom that you have that we could dive into a lot of those different areas. But today we're going to stay focused on play. But I want to talk about play therapy. Could you just give us an overview of what is play therapy?
Wow, that's such a great question, and it's such a huge question to answer, but I'm going to do my best to break it down. So we all know, and I'm sure you've had other guests on that have talked about the power of play, and that play is children's language.
Yes.
And so really simply put, play therapy is harnessing the power of play for therapeutic gains.
Okay.
So for example, if a child is anxious and they're a young children don't come in and sit down on the couch and say, well, here's why I'm anxious, and I'm going to tell you all about that. But they will use their play to communicate to us. And because they use their play to communicate, we can actually help them process things that have their thoughts, things that maybe they believe about themselves that aren't accurate. We can help them process traumas that have occurred in their life, and we can just help them build confidence. And so all of those are therapeutic gains. But I think the big thing that separates it is that we have an intention when we're doing it. We're really working with, hey, we're working to resolve something that's going on with that child and help them build a skill or build resilience in an area.
Okay, I love that. That explains kind of what you're doing, what you're trying to see. What about, is there a specific age that play therapy is geared towards?
So traditional play therapy mostly will start with 3s, 4s, 5s, following along the stages of play, for example. But one of the things I love about being an infant mental health specialist is we know that play happens from infancy.
Yes.
And play happens in the dyadic relationship between a caregiver and a child. And so when we work with children under 3, and we do that frequently at my office, we really work with the dyadic unit. We work with the caregiver and the child. And there is so much play that happens there. The difference is we're not necessarily using a toy per se, but we're using the parent or the caregiver as the focus of interest and the focus of engagement for that child, and helping that parent engage with that child.
So the younger years, the infancy, when they're little, it's more of a back and forth connection time that you're trying to kind of build through that.
Yes.
And then you mentioned like the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. We did an episode with Andy earlier, and she talked about like the stages of play. What if I'm sitting here listening and I know that my child age-wise is behind in those stages? Does play therapy still work if you're behind in those stages?
Yes. And the short answer to that, I said that really quickly,
yeah,
very
you
confidently.
Did. You answered that very confidently.
Yes, I like to get straight to the heart of the matter. But yes, of course it helps. And the reason it helps is because one of the goals is development. And so we're trying to help a child come along in development. And I often use play therapy to help parents know how to facilitate growth and development in their children. It's not just that something has to be wrong necessarily, but okay, maybe we're a little behind in this area. It's funny, a lot of parents, and I talk to them about this frequently in my office. One of the questions I'll say is, how did you play as a child? And what I find is a lot of us didn't.
I know. We just talked about that because we'll have moms all the time tell us, I don't know how to play. Like, you're wanting me to play with them, but what do I do? How do I play with them? So tell me about that. Like, is that when you back up and teach the parents how to play? What do you do with that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think they know more than they think they do.
Okay.
And so a lot of it's just giving them confidence in, hey, this really, there's not a lot of difficulty in playing. It feels hard for us. So one of the main things we teach them how to do is just delight in their child's play, because that really is what the main goal of what the child needs is for them somebody to delight in their play. But we also help parents learn, yes, this is what it feels like to play. Are you having fun? So I remember over the last several years, I've worked with families that come in and say, I just can't. I get too bored when we're sitting here.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we do is we say, hey, just limit your play sessions to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be 3 hours of play. Let's start somewhere. Start with 10 minutes and let's talk about how that feels to do 10 minutes. And if you feel like you can do that. And so we meet families where they're at. We meet children where they're at. And so because we work from the minute a child is born, we can even work prenatally, believe it or not, but we work from the minute that child is born all the way up until they're grown. And we actually even use play therapy with adults.
Yeah, really?
We do. We do it all the time. And so we're able to use that. That's how powerful play is. We're able to meet that person where they are and engage them in a play that fits and feels comfortable for them. Is there,
do you do an assessment before you start the play therapy? What are you looking at?
We do a lot of assessments, actually. A lot of it depends on the type of therapy we're going to be using.
Okay.
There are literally as many assessments as there are types of therapy. In our office, we use a lot of videotaped assessment. And what I mean by that is we don't want a parent and a child to be trying to play and us sitting in a corner in the room watching.
Yeah.
It really adds pressure. and we don't want to add pressure. So with permission from the family, we just do a video and we set that up. And then there are tasks that they have to do in that play assessment. It helps us assess kind of what the strengths are of that dyadic relationship and what's already going really well. And then areas we might want to work on. And so then we review that with the family, and then it's just only seen by the family.
Okay, wait, I love this. So you actually set up a video. They come in, you give them specific tasks, like things to play, and then you videotape them while they're interacting and playing, and then you record that, and then you watch it together and teach them what they did good and maybe some things they could do better in. Is that what that is?
Yeah. And what we find, and what I think parents are always a little bit intimidated, and I tell them, there's no way you'll fail this play assessment.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to pass or fail it. It's just a window into if we were to come to your home and hang out for a weekend, how you and your child interact. And so we give them tasks, but the tasks are specific. So they're in structure, nurture, engagement, and challenge. Usually those 4 quadrants comes from a therapy called TheraPlay. But we start there, and we start with assessments. And what's most fun for me about that is I'm able to use the power of video to play it back to a parent and say, look at how his face lit up when you did that.
Good.
And look at how maybe she scooted closer to you when you did that, because they're doing some really good things already, but they don't always get to see that from a third party viewpoint. And so we really use video a lot to help them see the things that are going really well.
Okay. So after you've done the assessment, you videotaped it, you've gone over it. Could you talk to us just what a typical play therapy hour, is it an hour, it looks like? And the reason I say that is we have a lot of parents that we will refer to play therapy. I hear it, a lot, especially from dads, and they'll say, I don't want to pay money for them just to play. They are just playing. It's just expensive. It's just play. I can play at home. Like they just don't get it. So tell us, why is it important? What skills are you looking at? Just kind of tell us more about that.
I think that's such a common thing for people to say. And so a couple of things about that. One is I would feel that way if I thought my child was just going and playing and I was paying for that. And I will tell you, there are situations where play, just a session is just that in some places, varying levels of experience. But what a trained play therapist will do is to have an intention and be able to explain that intention. So before I ever go into a play therapy session or recommend a play therapy session with a parent, I've done a full intake and I've really helped try to understand what's going on. And then I'll usually explain to them why I'm doing what I'm doing. So it's not play without a purpose.
Okay.
And so we are following the child a lot. There's a type of therapy called child-centered play therapy, and there's some specific types of things that we use child-centered play therapy for. We might use a more directive art approach where we're telling them to do something. So play therapy is so encompassing. It's really so much more than just getting out some blocks and playing together on the floor. So I might use blocks, but so for example, okay, we're playing with blocks, but this child has some anxiety and they don't have confidence. And so we're going to use the blocks and we're going to build them over and over again, and we're going to knock them down, because that's building confidence and mastery. And we talk about we're needing to build mastery play here. That's a stage that maybe we missed, or something that child needs to do. Or if it's a confidence issue or an anxiety issue, we want to pay close attention to however you play is the right way to play. There's not a right or wrong way to play. And so we give them verbal feedback and we help parents learn to encourage them in a way that builds that skill. So intentionality is very important. A registered play therapist, or a person that is training to be a registered play therapist, is going to be able to tell you why they're doing what they're doing.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Because there are a lot of people out there that are a play therapist, but they're not a registered play therapist. What's the difference?
So becoming a registered play therapist is actually fairly tough. It requires 150 hours of continuing education beyond the master's degree, or beyond the licensure that you have. And then it requires, I think, an additional 500 cases that are supervised by a specifically registered play therapist supervisor. So you have to bring cases in and review them. So you're getting a lot of mentoring. And so to achieve registered play therapist status is not a small feat. And so when you get a person that's a registered play therapist, you can be assured they are very invested in learning all the different modalities and learning about how to incorporate play therapy appropriately.
Yeah, and it's probably just a different level of therapy versus just plain play therapy. Might be more playing where they're registered. To me, it seems, just because I know you, you're really kind of specialized in play and know what to be looking for.
Right. And we train our staff, we have people that are working towards that. So I would tell families, don't discount a therapist just because they don't have that credential yet. It takes a while to earn.
Yeah, it does.
And so there are a lot of play therapists that are really working towards that, but it's a several year process. So I would just want to ask the question, like, how are you working towards play therapy? Or a really simple question is, what type of play therapy do you use?
Yeah.
And somebody that would understand play therapy would be able to talk to you about the different modalities that they use.
Okay, that's good. That's very good to know. What about, why are children falling behind in play? Why is that why socially are those skills missing?
Well, I think there are a lot of things. I think like any other thing that we see, there's a lot of factors. Over the years, and I said I've been doing this 17 years, almost 18 years now. And when I first started, one of the obvious things is that we just didn't have devices like we have now. And one of the things I've seen kind of across the board as technology has grown and we've added that more and more to our homes is that the play has shifted to electronic play. Mm-hmm. And well-intentioned and busy parents are handing kids devices to be able to play that way. I also think that when COVID happened, we were isolated.
Yeah.
And the opportunities for children to engage socially were just not there anymore. So since the pandemic, I've seen a really big decline in children's ability to play. And then the last thing is I also believe that parents, this generation of parents, me included, did not really get played with as a child. And so I think it was a little bit of the perfect storm of a lot of things. But I have a part of my assessment that I do in our videotaped assessment that says, play a familiar game with your child. And it is more common than not for a parent to pull out a phone and hand a child a phone. And that's not really a play.
Right.
That's an engaged activity where mom and dad may be watching, but that is not utilizing the power of play.
Yeah, it's not a back and forth interaction play.
Right. And so that tells me a lot about how we've shifted to, we don't know how to do that. And sometimes we're too busy or we don't have the patience overall. And so I think it's a learned skill. Yeah. And we just haven't spent the time learning it.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the COVID. I think we're all tired of hearing about COVID.
Yes.
But one of our assessments is with our older kids, we have to have them sing like a 30-word song. And before COVID, I always had them sing Happy Birthday. Every kid knew it. It was easy. After COVID, these children, when I would ask them to sing it, they didn't know Happy Birthday. And it was because they weren't going to birthday parties.
They never went to birthday parties. It makes so much sense.
I mean, there was like a year of them not going to birthday parties. And I noticed that they literally could not sing that song because they weren't going to even just family birthday parties, but then all the kid birthday. I mean, they sing that song probably once a month. But during COVID, they weren't. And so really, I noticed that, multiple kids where I would have to get it started and they would know maybe a few words, but not very many. Now it's not like that. We can ask them and they'll all start singing it again. But there was a period where they really and truly did not know the Happy Birthday song. And I think it just shows you that they were alone. They weren't having those normal, natural interactions like we want them to have.
Well, and one of the other things that I've seen over the course of the whole time, not just before COVID, but the whole time I've been in practice is we used to do, or I almost always do with children when they come in, what I call a kinesthetic family drawing. So it's draw what your family does at home.
That's good.
And so early on in my career, I would see maybe them playing soccer in the front yard or them having dinner together at the table or watching TV together.
Yeah.
And almost every child now that draws the picture of their family, almost every will draw all the family in separate rooms on different devices. And so it's just a really interesting statement on we're not even really within our homes together in a way that we were even 10 years ago.
I know. It's just really different.
And
I don't know how you fix that except by educating and just having families back up when they're little to just play like games and back and forth conversation and not be on the devices.
Well, what I tell parents, and a lot of them don't really realize this, is when you engage and make eye contact and laugh with your child and feel connected to your child, it actually releases feel-good hormones into your body. And so you do get an engagement, a kind of a hit of feel-good hormones that maybe, we talk about dopamine hits on the when you get a screen in front of you and the things that does, but it really does. Play begets more play. If you'll get involved, even though if it feels awkward at the beginning, the delight and the laughter and the shared experience makes parents feel closer, which thereby makes them want more of that. And so it's a cycle. You just have to stop and intentionally start the cycle back the other direction.
That's great. What about if I am a mom and I'm sitting here going, I know my child isn't playing right. I've watched him at birthday parties. He's not interacting the way he should or the way I think he should. I think he would benefit from play therapy. Could you talk maybe just about a couple cases, like what they were struggling with when they came in, how you kind of worked with them, and then when are they done with play therapy? Like how do you end up graduating or being done with that?
That's such a good question, too. Also, I have to tell my families, you do graduate.
I know,
at
it's
some
not
point.
forever.
It's
Even
not
though
forever.
you said you do it with adults, it's not forever.
I really am not designed to be with you forever. And so we laugh about that, especially at the end of termination of treatment. But there are really two main things that I can think of that I see people now for play. Well, actually three. One is that anxiety issue. We're seeing more and more and more anxious children, younger than I've ever seen them. Very, very worried.
Us too.
Lots of fears. And so that is one area where if you feel your child is overly fearful or anxious or maybe overthinking things. We see a lot of perfectionistic children who are afraid to make mistakes. And some of that's temperament and who kids are. But if your mom or dad gut says, yeah, this is not typical for them to feel that anxious about something, then that's one thing that we work with a lot. And most of the time, that is pretty easily resolved through dyadic intervention. Either it's in my office, I do a combination. I may play with that child by themselves for a little bit to kind of assess what's going on. But I always bring mom or dad in and say, let's figure out how to do this, because let's be real, 1 hour a week in my office is not going to be more important than what happens at home. And so my goal is to equip mom and dad or family or grandma and grandpa or whoever the caregivers are to be able to give them what they need and support at home. That's one. Definitely another one is emotional regulation.
Yes.
I see a lot of fit throwers.
We see that too. I feel like of course we see a lot of anxiety, but talk to us about dysregulation. What does that mean? What does that look like?
So emotional dysregulation, in the olden days, we'd say you're throwing a fit or you're flipping your lid is sometimes a word we use for it. Where it becomes a problem is when those tantrums or big feelings last an excessively long time. And so I'll see families, and it depends on the age, so I ask a lot about age, but kids are going to throw fits. Yes. They're going to get upset about something. We get upset about things. As adults, we get upset about things. So the fact that a child has emotion that comes out in the way it comes out is really a product of age. So a 2-year-old is going to look very different in how they handle their anger as a 10-year-old, right?
But, well, I was going to say, we'll have families call us and they'll say they're throwing terrible temper tantrums. And we'll say, well, how old are they? When they say 2, we're like, well, good. They're supposed to. Right. That's normal development. Right. But as they get older and then they can't regulate it, that's where it gets kind of scary.
So we come at that from 2 directions. Okay. One is if they come in and they're 2, we say, that's awesome. Let's talk about why that bothers you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because a lot of times what we find is that there's some fears there, maybe, or some misconceptions from on the part of whoever the caregiver is like, oh, this shouldn't be happening. And maybe they're really unhappy or they're really not doing well. And so probably the skill I work on the very most is increasing children's distress tolerance. And that sounds a little bit harsh. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make them distressed so that they can increase their distress tolerance. But a lot of times what happens is children have these big feelings, and then we as adults don't know what to do about that, and it feels uncomfortable for us. And so we try to shut it down, and we don't come alongside a child and hold them in that distress. And so what we're seeing on the other end in our office at teenager is they cannot handle hard things. They can't handle anything that doesn't really go their way. And so when things are upsetting and they've had the experience all the time of it being shut down or being told you're fine when you're really not,
right,
or not having somebody acknowledge that the fact that your brother broke your pencil is a giant deal to you at 5 years old,
right,
then what happens is when they get older, they don't know how to handle big emotions. And so the obvious risk is when they get older, they turn to other things to handle big emotions. And so what I tell families is the best thing we can do is learn to hold our children's emotions and be strong enough and big enough and kind enough that we can be a part of that. Kind of like the example I gave a mom the other day was they're waves, they're big waves, and you're just the wall, and the waves are breaking on the wall, and you're just going to be solid and there and okay while we hold and contain these emotions for them to help them learn to regulate down. Because the power in what we want for our kids is not to never have the big emotion, it's to learn to regulate and calm down.
And to know what to do with that big emotion.
Right.
So as a parent, being that wall, is it just kind of meeting them with those big emotions? Don't shut that emotion down. It's letting them have those emotions, but they aren't counselors, so they don't know what to say or do during that time.
Right. And so that's what we do. In our sessions, we talk about it, we coach it. And so when there's, when a child, I can think of a session I had recently where this child was really screaming, like laying on the floor, screaming. And he was a little bit big to be doing that. And I looked at mom, and I could see mom's eyes, and her eyes were really big. And so we just sat and said, hey, we're just going to be with that. Like it's a normal feeling for him to have. It's a big feeling, and it's taking up the room, but it was that we said no to something, and it was time to go. And it was just really hard. And so once we held that, I shared with her at the end, it only took about 4 minutes to calm that down. It felt like 30 when the emotion was really big. But it really doesn't take that long. And so at the end, we had a beautiful, sweet moment where he climbed into her lap and she was able to hug him. And we talked about that's the power of a parent. It's not that you have to make the emotion go away. It's that you can say, I'm here in it, and I can hold it for you, and I'm not going to leave you alone in it, and we'll figure it out together.
What about those kids that you do need to get out the door, and you don't have the 4 minutes to let them scream and cry, and then the 5 minutes to climb into your lap? I mean, that's beautiful.
Right.
It's a dream world. We all would love that. But I'm just thinking as a mom, I mean, life is busy and you're going, and what do you do when you do need to stop it and move on? Is that a bad thing?
No, not at all. And I think that's a misconception of a lot of people, is that play therapy and play therapists are really permissive, and we want to hold all the feelings all the time.
Right.
And so what I would tell you is research says exactly the opposite, that children need structure and nurture. And so it's like any other parenting tool. If they throw a fit and they want a cookie every night, that's probably not the best thing for them. But a cookie once in a while is okay. And so it's very, very similar. What you want is the ability to choose and attune to your child and know when we just got to get out the door. And when I really need to stop and pause for a minute. So what we're coaching parents on is attunement, so they know when to do that. And it's not an extreme one way or the other.
Yeah, because it takes both.
Absolutely, it takes both.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes we shut it down just because we don't have time to deal with it. And for that listener that's listening going, well, I do it all the time, I'm a terrible mom. Sometimes we have to do that.
I would coach you that if you were in my office and you said, I'm a terrible mom, I would say, no, you're a mom who's choosing when to utilize that tool.
Okay, that's good.
And that's not the same thing as shutting it down because you have to go. And here's the great thing. I tell parents all the time, kids' needs are like a merry-go-round. If you miss one, there's one coming along. in just another minute. So it's not like if you mess it up and you shut something down that maybe you should have attuned to, you're not going to have another chance in about 30 seconds to do something else. And so really it is about attunement. And I tell parents in my office all the time, you know your child. If I met with them every day, all day for 3 years, I wouldn't know them as well as you know them. Mm-hmm. And so my job is not to tell parents you should or you shouldn't. My job is to help parents know what the signs of emotional dysregulation are, when the distress is too much for that child, and when to intervene, and then help them have the confidence to utilize that.
That's great. That's great. What are some ways that parents could just incorporate, or families could incorporate, play more throughout the day?
I think that play is probably the easiest thing to incorporate, but the thing we do the least. So in the car, playing games if you're driving in the car, singing songs in the car, that's play, being playful. Anything that makes you giggle and laugh is probably an okay way to play. I love doing fun, impromptu things. Like one of the things I incorporated with my family after I learned more about play is we would just do impromptu dance parties in our kitchen while we were doing dishes.
Yes.
And we would take kids, the kids would take turns picking the song or doing whatever. We would go out and walk around the neighborhood and see how many hops we could take to get to the corner. Just fun, challenging things. It doesn't have to involve 14 million toys.
Right.
It just is being together and enjoying each other. And that's where that power of play comes in. It connects people.
Yeah, I love it. And same for me. When our kids were little, we would try to just come up with, I always had a deck of cards in my purse because I feel like there's a million things you can do with a deck of cards. And so we just always tried to throw in little things that didn't make your bag too heavy, but that you could pull out and do it. I love the taking a walk. I feel like you can do that anywhere at any time and come up with creative ways. I think people think play is like sitting down and playing a board game, which those are wonderful. But we don't have time for that sometimes. So it's okay to pull out just simple creative. It's really just interacting back and forth and communicating and having a good time.
I have 4 children, and I have a almost 24-year-old, and he recently got married. And when he was little, he created a game where I would say, when I was with him at night, I would say, "I love you," and he would say, "I love you" to the door and back. And then we'd go through, and I'd one up him, and we got to where at the end we always, "I love you to infinity," and then he would say infinity and infinity and infinity, and we'd go through this game. And so, out of all the things he remembers from his childhood, that's what he remembers. And so when he got married, he wrote me a note that said, "I love you to infinity." And that was a different, a thing that shows me that it wasn't fancy.
No.
It was 5 minutes before bed.
Yeah.
And that's what he remembers, or one of the things he remembers. Yeah. So just knowing if it's fun for you and you're engaging and laughing, it's probably great.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a toy.
No, that is so good. Is there anything that you want to add that I have maybe left off, just that you want a family to know about play therapy or about play? Is there anything specific that maybe you're like, I kind of wanted to touch on this and we didn't?
I think that I just want to encourage families in a couple of things. I think the idea of seeing a therapist sometimes feels really scary.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, they're going to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. And what I will tell you is that a good play therapist is going to champion you. They are going to hear you, and they are going to come alongside you.
Yeah.
It is not ever about telling you have to do these 5 things or you're not a good parent.
Yeah.
Most play therapists that I know are really committed to families and want to do this job really well and love and are passionate about children. So it should feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And I tell people in my office, if I'm not a good fit, let me give you some names.
Yeah.
I want you to feel comfortable with who you're seeing, because it should be a good relationship. It should be a comfortable relationship.
I love it. I love it. It's just about meeting families where they are and helping them build the skills to make their family better.
Right.
Which is awesome.
Right.
Building Old Children is always about the Bible. We're always about scripture and turning our families back to the truth. Do you have a scripture that you would love to share with our families?
Yeah, I actually have 2, which is,
I love that.
I have a reason for 2, but I think it's interesting because I had never really gone back and looked at play in the Bible, and I found this beautiful verse in Zechariah, and it was Zechariah 8:5, and it talks about Zechariah is predicting about what Jerusalem will look like when they all return to Jerusalem. And he says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each of them with cane in hand because of their age. And then in verse 5, it says, the city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there.
I love
and
it.
so for me, it was a beautiful picture, not just that those boys and girls are out in the yard playing alone, but there's people there.
Yeah, they're
and it's
together.
that community
Yeah.
of we're all together. And that's the way God designed it.
Yeah, I love it.
I love that. And then the other one I just always tell parents is, I think as parents, or a lot of the ones I see, and I know me, is we feel so much burden to raise great children. And I tell them not everything's a teachable moment. Sometimes it's just an enjoyable moment.
Oh, I think that's
And
good.
so I love to point them to Ecclesiastes 3, which is there's a time for everything. And so all of those verses outline there's a time to mourn and a time to dance. But there is a time, I would add, if I could add, there's a time to teach things and then there's a time to just be. And so because Ecclesiastes assures us there's a time for every purpose under heaven, that you don't have to feel the pressure all the time to make it a teachable moment.
I love it. It's just be in the time, because the time goes so fast.
So fast.
And when my kids were little, I had a couple people tell me that, and you're in it day to day and you're like, this is not going very fast. But man, now that mine are older, it goes so fast. So just be in the time. I love it. Kristen, thank you. Thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge. We learned so much. I know we're going to have you on here more because we have other topics that we want you to come and share with. So we will have you back. I know we will. But thank you for your wisdom today.
You are so welcome. I love to see the work you do with families and just be a small part of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Let us close with a word of prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for these children in our lives. Thank you for all the resources you have placed in our life to help us rise up and build. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for listening to the Rise and Build podcast, brought to you by Building All Children, a child development program in Tulsa, Oklahoma. To learn more about Building All Children or the Rise and Build podcast, please visit buildingallchildren.org. This podcast is crowdfunded. We appreciate our sponsors and the donations given by our listeners. Come with us as we rise and build.